Hello everyone, my name is Utsav, and in this session we are going to cover the installing of an application in terms of looking it at from the first principles. Let's get started. Let's have a bit of an overview of like what the overall what are the components. Let's take an example of the Android operating system and the Android device to understand that what are the components and where does an application how does it fit in those components, right? So let's start with the hardware. um, so hardware, we know, right? This is the device, this is the the CPUs, processors, which has to kind of process any such kind of request. And then there's another layer called the kernel. uh, so within the kernel, right, there's this is a layer which directly interacts with the hardware. It can things like drivers. In Windows we call it drivers, but they're let's say in case of Android, right, this kernel has been kind of a derivative of the Linux operating system. No, not getting more deep into it, but the job of a kernel is to kind of interact with the hardware components, and next, on top of that, there'll be another layer called the Android I can say package, or this entire Android operating system, right? So the Android operating system is the one where you will have all the things such as the file system, anything, system, anything that storage, how it is maintained, right? How the storage is maintained, how the a certain application will interact, and how it will be interpreted, right? uh, all those logic, everything is written in the Android package. Now on top of this, right, so the Android package will interact with the kernel, and on top of this we will have the application. So application is the one that is directly interacting with the user. So this is how the kind of overall it will look like. User who interacts with the application, who interacts with the Android package, who interacts with the kernel, and then kernel interacts with the hardware. So after covering this part, we are moving to the next one. Yeah, so now we've covered the initial introduction, right? Like what is the overall architecture, and where exactly will the application fit in. Now let's move on to what an application is, right? So application is a bunch of files, right? Of files. It could be written in a particular language, or such as in case of it could be a Kotlin application, it could be like a Java application. And what does that file mean, right? So let's say there'll be the code component, how the code will work. There'll be a resource component. There'll be something called a manifest file. So let's understand it from the basic, right? From the first principle, that if there's a particular, application, and in that application there's a particular button. So in this button, if the user is clicking, so there has to be this button UI, or its image or its color needs to be kept somewhere, all these components. Now what happens if the user clicks on this button? What all the APIs will be called, or how it might make a network call, uh, or to fetch some data, or it might just navigate to the next screen. So there could be several logic, right? So this is part of the code. And what if the button is has a image background and all that will be taken care from the resource. And then what is the manifest file, right? Manifest file is the one that would kind of interact with the Android package to tell the Android package, right? So Android as a operating system wants to know, right, that what's the structure of your particular application. There could be several components, right, that do I load the all the files when your application is updated, or do I load only the delta, only the difference, all those kind of configurations, right? So we can say that all these kind of configurations are kind of added as the manifest file. Now, so this is the overview of what the application is, right? It's like a bundle of different kind of files. Now let's go and explore a bit of a code and how it works. And okay, now let's deep dive into a particular code, right? So let's say if there's a for loop, right? I equal to 0, I less than 10, I plus plus. So this kind of basic code is written, which will say, let's say get cache. So this will call a function which would fetch the cache, available cache, or like this is just a hypothetical example, right? So this is the function. Now what happens is there's when the application is and if you see in your Android device, the application has two stages, right? One is the download where the code and all the files get downloaded, right? And the second one is the installation. Now what happens in the installation stage, right? The installation stage, this entire package, right? This package of so I would call it package, or I can call it a bundle of files, right? Will simply get added in file system and it gets added in the Android, right? In the Android OS directories, and so all the details around where do I get, where do I invoke the code, what's the launcher code, and all those things will be kind of added in the Android directories. And it will be like Android will be creating an icon, right, from what's mentioned, right, in this bundle. There'll be a icon that will be mentioned in the resource. So and there'll be a name of this entire application. So all this detail, Android can simply pick it up. It creates it those things on the user interface. And apart from the launch time, right, there has to be two stages, right? There has to be a compile stage, and there has to be a running of the application, right? So these two we will cover. Okay, so as in the previous section we were looking at this, right, that if for I equal to 0, I less than 10, I plus plus. So this is something that will be running for 10 times, right? And if there's a get cache, so what happens is that this entire code, right, this code gets compiled. So there'll be two stages of the compiler. On the stage one, let's say if there's a loop that runs 10 times, right? So get cache. So this will create the the overall version. It will write get cache, so that everything whatever is written in a particular way is to be really goes into a particular sequence, right, as to what will be called. So there should be exact sequence, that 1 2 3, this is how all the functions and all the things will be called. And from there'll be another version of it which will be just 0 0 1 0 1, right? Because at the end of it, this is what the CPU can process. So in the earlier part we've covered, right, the kernel and the hardware and the Android SDK and the code, right? So this is the application code, right? It's taking from the application code, and the this area, right, where it's compiling is something which is the Android as an OS. This gets compiled, and at the Android OS stage it will interact here. And then when I say this will be handed over to the kernel as a byte file, and the kernel would be interacting with the CPU to kind of process it and fetch back the response. uh, so this is like very basic first principles of how an application runs, and how an Android would be processing the same.